Everybody, good evening. I'm actually tuning in from Switzerland tonight, so it's with great joy to be back in a space and discussing the college. It's been a bit of time. It's actually my very first AGM that I've been able to attend because I've actually never been in town at the time, so it's really a great joy. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak. Just want to double check, can everyone hear me okay? Just a little thumbs up. Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, so I just want to start off by saying that, had anyone talked to us in 2011, the graduating class from ECP, and said, where do you think you're going to be in 10 years' time? I would put good money on the fact that nobody would have said a global pandemic. And I just wanted to say that I hope everyone's holding up well. I know that the last 12 months have been a very wild ride, truly extraordinary times to be living. It really is history. But I think for all the struggles that we experienced, I think that there was also a tremendous amount of reflection on the things we can be grateful for. And I think one of them is the ability to reconnect with familiar faces. And I'm really touched to say that I actually see quite a few faces I'm recognizing on the screen right now. So it's a real great joy. So where have I been in the last 10 years? I have moved around a fair bit, as a little bit of a spoiler alert. After ECP, I also moved up to Scotland, so there definitely is a theme there. Though I went to the University of St Andrews, so it's about 2 hours away from Edinburgh, but Edinburgh is such a beautiful city, Lenka, I know it very well. It's a good familiar turf there. I went to St Andrews to read geography, and one of the big attractive features I found when it came to choosing universities within the Scottish system was the flexibility that it allowed. So normally in England, I found that in most cases you were looking at just the 1 degree subject, which, having come from 6 subjects in the IB, which I loved, the idea of just whistling it down to the 1 subject to be quite daunting. So when I arrived at St Andrews, I was thrilled that I could take up to 3 subjects. And I ended up taking the 3 subjects I took at higher level, which I don't think it's any surprise to anyone who knows me. I really am quite a nerd and I do love my learning. So I was really pleased that I could continue to explore the different fields in different ways. I chose human geography largely in part because of Miss Daly's geography classes. I absolutely fell in love with her teaching style. I'm seeing Lenka nodding as well. She just made the subject come alive, and it was such a thrill to be in those classes. It really was a highlight. And I felt that probably for the first time, that was when I really experienced what it meant to truly fall in love with the subject. I'd always enjoyed being in a classroom and learning, but actually seeking out that information and putting together case studies and seeing how it came together, that big picture thinking is really what turned me onto the subject as a whole. Now, when I arrived at St Andrews and started studying human geography, I realized that while the subject itself was great, I didn't quite have that spark there anymore. And it was probably largely because Miss Daly wasn't there as that guiding force anymore. So I found that it was actually in the biology classes that I was taking that I was really drawn to the subject. And that was where I was finding myself enjoying putting in that time to achieve the grades that I was looking for. It should also be mentioned that from a very young age of 10 years old, I've been an avid scuba diver. So when I then approached my parents to say I'm thinking about changing my degree focus to marine biology, they probably saw it coming long before I did, to be honest. But it was thanks to this flexible structure that the Scottish system had that I was able to change my degree focus and actually not have to face any delays that came my way. So I think that flexibility is really important, and I'm sure that there are a number of students out there who are grateful to the IB for having given them the breadth of subjects so that they could make that change once they got to university, because making that decision at 16 or 17 years old, what your focus is going to be, it tends to be with limited information. And I think the ability to change later on was really important, certainly from my career perspective. The other similarity to Lenka's story, in fact, is the community service aspects that I've absolutely adored when I was in my IB years. And a couple of that come to mind that are really points which I take a huge amount of pride in was mostly the Havel Scholarship. So this was an initiative that myself and 3 other students decided that we wanted to set up just before we left the college as a way of giving back and saying thank you. So this was with Dora Robinson, Marie Smethankova, and Chavi Magoo. And this was a wonderful way for us to also have a bit of a send-off from the college, having done so much growing up in that space. I also did a number of different charity initiatives when I was in my capacity as the student council president. And then as a part of my CAS work, was working to do a big clothes drive for the Burmese refugees that happened to be coming in at a certain time of that year. And I'm really curious, actually, it's a question that I might ask Nigel later, but in terms of CAS projects and the meaningful skill set that we develop through doing those kinds of projects, I really hope the students are still able to take part in some capacity within CAS, because similarly, again, to what Lenka said, those skills are really what carries you through and are very memorable later on. So when I arrived at St Andrews, I found myself really missing this community service and this charitable volunteering. So I ended up joining a host of different societies that had that as the center point of their focus. And the two projects of note was I ended up co-directing the university's Raising and Giving Week, which in the UK university systems is quite a familiar concept, but to anyone who hasn't come across it before, is basically a week dedicated to just raising funds for different services that come up. And during that week, we raised over £30,000. So we consider that to be quite a success. And then once again, as I was nearing the end of my degree, I found similar vibes that I was getting when I was finishing up at ECP, that I really wanted to give back to the St Andrews community. So I became the chairperson to what was called Class Gift, but it was effectively a fundraising arm or branch of the Students' Association where we collected funds for the student bursary. So there was definitely a theme of wanting to give back and be a part of that process of contributing to the service around us, the community around me. Then I think most soon-to-be graduates probably go through the same process of coming up on graduation and still probably don't know where they want to go. That was certainly my experience as well. And I was quite honestly blessed to have a very kind and savvy academic advisor who pointed out that I have spent pretty much my entire life within academia, and all of the internships that I'd done had always been connected to the academic world. What I need to do is try and work within the field that I love so much, but in a non-academic setting, just to see how that actually felt, because I wouldn't know if I wanted to stay within academia unless I'd actually tried being outside of it. So I felt that the most applicable next step for me would be to get a professional diving qualification. And that led me to move to the south of Spain, which was quite an adventure, very different from the cold Scottish winters, but it was definitely welcomed at the time. What was meant to be a 3-month internship turned into 2.5 years, where I ended up getting my instructor's license and then working my way up the ladder to train future instructors, which felt very reminiscent of Mr. Hudson's theory of knowledge classes, where it was all about the learning of learning and what one could take on in terms of teaching. And luckily I had a huge number of good teachers to call upon in terms of how I wanted to be a teacher in my own right in that world. At the same time, I was also the manager for the dive center at the time, and quite honestly, every single day felt like it was another one of Mr. Hillier's drama shows that we were putting on. I feel like the lessons I learned through producing some of those shows are probably the most important that I'll ever have within a workplace environment. So it was quite nice to see the ties come through there. Now, despite having loved being in the diving community and being in the water every day, I really found myself missing the intellectual stimulation that came from working in a more academic environment. So I started to look for different opportunities out there. And that's how I came to find Frontiers, and which is why I'm now in Switzerland, which is a bit of a strange place as a marine biologist, given that we are entirely landlocked. But Frontiers is an open access peer review publisher where we have over 90 different journals across multiple different disciplines. And I am the Senior Review Operations Specialist, which is a very fancy title. I will explain shortly what that means. But the continuity here is that it's for the Frontiers in Marine Science journal. Effectively, what I'm responsible for is finding other scientists to review the incoming submissions to make sure that the science is valid. And I think that the last 12 months has really demonstrated how important it is to make sure that we ensure that our science is valid and that we're using it to make well-informed decisions, especially when it comes to policy-making decisions. So the cool thing about Frontiers is that it's quite a disruptor within its field, and it actually is, well, its main focus is to try and tackle the traditional paywall publisher. And it has an entirely new kind of model for how we've taken over the industry. And the big cause behind the company is the idea of making science open. And I think, again, the last 12 months have really highlighted why it's so important that science is easily accessible and open to as many people as possible. That actually then draws me onto my next point, which was that when the company started receiving COVID-19 manuscripts, myself and 2 others were hand-selected to oversee the operations for those manuscripts because of the expertise I'd gotten through other article collections, which Marine Science was known for becoming quite particular with some of their incoming submissions. So for the majority of last year, I actually was completely off point in terms of my expertise and was involved in the COVID-19 peer review process. And that was really quite a remarkable experience. And coming back to Miss Daly's geography classes, the big picture thinking that could be applied there, it was really lovely to see that as being the way that I could contribute to the global effort in a absolutely minute way to trying to have a collective response to what we were all going through. I do still desperately miss the water. My job is sadly quite dry. I'm normally at a desk, which does upset me sometimes, but when I can, I do try and go out diving, normally in more tropical environments. I haven't yet tried the Lake Geneva diving scene, but we'll see, I might get quite desperate. But my main interest there is being able to use my, again, community service, charitable volunteering streak, if you will. And I'm actually quite heavily involved in several coral planting projects. So I'm spending my holidays going out there and planting juvenile corals onto marine protected areas in the hopes of trying to build back the reefs a little bit. I think I'll leave my speech at that point, but I'd be welcome to have any questions come my way.